All right, just so everybody's clear, we're live on Facebook and we're recording, which I think everybody knows. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes. Okay, hey guys, let's go ahead and get started because we only have an hour and I want to make sure we give everyone time to ask their questions as well. So I'm Raksha, I use she, her pronouns, and I was one of the organizers of this with New York DSA's Tech Action working group. And my co-organizers were Grace from Tech Workers Coalition and Wes from Communication Workers of America. And I'm going to go ahead and let my panelists introduce themselves now. If you guys want to do name, pronouns, and where you're working and what your organizing is. Let's start with Steph.
Hi, everyone. I'm Steph Monette. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a worker at Glitch.
Awesome. Ben?
Hi, I'm Ben. I use he, him pronouns. I work for HCL at Google in Pittsburgh.
Hey everyone, I'm Toy. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an organizer for Kickstarter United at Kickstarter in New York.
Awesome, thank you guys. Can you guys all share a little bit, just kind of a summary of your organizing and unionizing background, just kind of what brought you to this panel, basically? We'll get more into the details of it further along, but maybe just a brief summary.
Yeah, so I've never had any experience organizing before. This was my first time working on this organizing committee. I grew up in a union family, though. Everyone in my family is UFCW, Workers for Safeway. So I kind of had some background on just the benefits of being part of the union.
Yeah, I also had zero organizing experience before getting involved with Kickstarter United. I guess my first introduction, I'm from the South, there's not a ton of union activity in Texas. So my first introduction to even like unions as a whole, I used to work in the music industry and I worked with Tom Morello, who's a very active labor advocate. So that was kind of my first introduction. And yeah, but until I joined Kickstarter, I was not active in any organizing.
This was also my first time organizing. My dad was a public sector labor arbitrator, so I have known about collective bargaining since I was a little boy. So that's kind of my background.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. I think it's really reassuring that to hear that people who've successfully organized in this industry don't have like a huge background in it or anything, that this is like a very doable thing for so many of us. So first question, why do you guys think workplace organizing in tech is important, and what part of that motivates you to do the work that you do?
I think kind of generally, if you have a boss, you could use a union, and that goes across all industries, especially in tech. Like, it's an industry that moves so quickly that, you know, there's just like teams that are shifting, there's layoffs, teams that are no longer needed. Sometimes it's used, sometimes it's not. And I think we kind of have been complacent in that as an industry, where we just have accepted that that's how it is. But unfortunately, our ability to pay rent and, you know, providing healthcare to our family is tied to our jobs, where it's just important to have a voice in when these decisions are happening, because it's, you know, it could be life or death, really. And I'm just happy that we are, bringing this to the mainstream and people are talking about it, and we're not just kind of like sitting back and taking it.
Yeah, definitely +1 stuff on that. I also think that there's the tech industry and those who hold power within it have and continue to go pretty unchecked, not only in labor, but in ethics, data privacy, et cetera. They have tech has, and these companies have presence in nearly everything that we in every aspect of our day-to-day lives, and historically tried and true way to check this power is to exercise our own work or collective worker power. So
I don't have a whole lot to add to that, but yeah, I think especially with how few companies hold so much power in the industry, that it's important that, workers have as much say as we can in how things go from here.
What's something that you all consider a win over the last year of tech organizing? So I know it kind of feels like a year and a half ago, we were not even considering having unions at these major companies, and now we've got 3, but it's crazy how far we've come along. What do you guys consider personal wins in your work?
I mean, aside from these 3 unions, which it's really, I feel very lucky to be on a panel with these other 2 folks. But more personally, recently bargaining the Kickstarter layoff severance package was a huge win for us. Just being able to offer a cushion to our colleagues during an incredibly trying time is proof alone that every worker needs a union.
Yeah, I want to second that. That seeing the severance that Kickstarter negotiated, that's just been amazing, and it's been a comfort to know that if something happens, we have a voice in these negotiations. I've seen a lot of friends who've been laid off recently, and it was just a surprise meeting that ended up on their calendar, and then that's how they found out. So just to have a voice is so important and comforting. I think just a big win is that we're having these conversations in a big way, that people are showing up to this panel and talking about it, and there's interest, and that's so different than a year and a half ago.
It's hard going last on all of these because everything gets said, but yeah, I think it's awesome just that we're having these conversations for sure. I was also going to point to the Kickstarter stuff. We were able to have a workplace action to get sent home sooner than our bosses wanted us to, way back, seems like ages ago. But yeah, it's, all of it is really good.
Toy, could you actually go into more detail about the Kickstarter success that you guys recently had?
Yeah, so I mean, as soon as it became clear that COVID was going to be affect our day-to-day, we quickly nominated an interim COVID committee to interface with management, with our reps from OPEIU. Just to kind of give you some context, like, we only became a union in February. So like, we weren't ready for this yet, but we quickly hopped to and jumped into it. There was an all hands in mid-April where it was alluded to the fact that layoffs were a potential strategy of our senior leadership as a response to COVID and other financial situations at the company. So we immediately reached out to leadership. Luckily, we had already elected that committee. In that first meeting, it was revealed that management was, in fact, planning to lay off 40% of the Kickstarter staff, with the majority of that 40% being a part of our bargaining unit. So at that point, we actively started negotiating and quickly elected a formal and permanent bargaining committee. The first conversations were really around gathering information from management around the thought process that went into making this decision, and why weren't there other options like on the table, or what other options had been on the table. And simultaneously, our working groups were moving really quickly to spin up surveys to gather information from our bargaining unit about what they expected from this situation and what they would feel comfortable with if in fact they were laid off. I have to say the distributed power within our bargaining unit was incredible and like awe-inspiring. the CBC would come out with notes and action items, and members of the bargaining unit would just like immediately dive into researching those areas. Our working groups were so incredibly like supportive in this as well. The unit was incredibly engaged in the process, and it made information gathering like internally super easy to do. But after it was clear that the formal restructure was inevitable, we started exploring options based on the info we had from our unit on how to lessen the blow for everyone. So we, it was a rough 2 weeks of bargaining, to be perfectly honest. But we were able to get from 2 to 3 weeks of severance per tenured year, which was their original, like the first thing that they said to us, to 4 months severance plus 4 months, 4 to 6 months, depending on where you fell within the median salary range of extended health care. The final week of bargaining was really emotional work. I'm not going to lie. I was in the room, and it was hard to have that information, to have like to be fighting for your coworkers. It was. I would feel very lucky to be able to have done that, but it was really emotional and taxing. But I'm really proud of where we landed. Proud of how far we've come as a unit, despite all that's happening around us and the history of like how we came to be Kickstarter United as well. I mean, it was played out in the press, so everyone is kind of aware of like how hard it was. So I'm incredibly proud of my colleagues.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, and congratulations on that seriously major success. Ben and Steph, do you guys have an example of a campaign or something that you've done with your unionized coworkers, something similar to that, or not similar, I guess?
So I don't think we have an example yet. We were voluntarily recognized about 2 weeks after Kickstarter got their union. So that means like what, the first week of March or something. So it's been early. We just elected our bargaining committee, and they're starting talks now, but no big ones yet.
So we were kept in the office for like a week after all the full-time employees got sent home. And so we coordinated a day where everybody wore black to work, and we took some pictures in the empty cafeteria, and you know, just kind of like drew attention to the fact that we were just left there in the office while this pandemic was going on, and pressured management into getting us sent home. That was the last day that we were in the office. So we were sent home immediately following that. So it was great to be able to coordinate that through the union and with the help of everyone at USW. And yeah, so far nobody's sick, so that's my cat.
All right, so on the flip side of that, can you guys share some setbacks you've had since you started organizing in your companies? And do you have any advice to people who might be in the same situations?
I mean, as someone who, I was pretty directly a part of the outreach working group when we were organizing. And I think one of the hardest parts of organizing is that, hey, so how do you feel about insert company here? Icebreaker conversation with your coworkers. That conversation is so hard. It often feels like it's coming out of left field for your colleagues, or even colleagues who are your friends, especially if your union isn't internally public yet. I remember feeling the most instances of cognitive dissonance that I've ever felt, like coming from like how I felt about a conversation versus how someone else felt about a conversation from those early combos. And I guess like some advice to people moving forward would be like, treat every colleague conversation equally, regardless of your previous relationships with those people. Ask questions and listen. Every conversation helps inform the next one. Be patient. It's okay to encourage. It's okay and encouraged to give space to those who set boundaries with you. So.
Yeah, those initial conversations are really hard. Glitch is a half remote company all the time. So there were a lot of instances where there were coworkers that literally no one on the organizing committee had ever spoken to before, and trying to like organically find a reason to talk to them and then also bring up these kind of touchy subjects was really, really difficult. I think the best strategy we had was we tried to find people who were close with people we didn't know. Just if you had some type of, connection, or you saw them chatting in some way, and just try to get them folded into the organizing committee to be representative of, where our blind spots are. Then there were just some people we couldn't figure out a connection to. And unfortunately, we asked them like as we were going public. It was like the last, 3 people on, the day we were changing all our avatars red and things. I think that my best advice is just to like seek out the natural organizers in your company, the people who are trying other initiatives, and try to get them involved in your organizing process, because they know how to talk to a lot of people and they've already done some of this groundwork to form those connections, and you can really rely on their experience.
I had a lot of difficult conversations as well, and did a lot of the same things that it sounds like the other panelists have done. I think it's really important not to like take it personally when someone doesn't want to be involved, or especially like before the vote or before recognition. Not to burn any bridges, because we're going to need everybody to vote on a contract soon too. So you want to make sure that it doesn't ever get too contentious. My advice would be like just to be just to keep quiet, to not let management find out. That's my biggest advice.
Yeah, just before we go on, kind of a logistical thing, I see a lot of people pinging the chat, and I think there are 2 options in Zoom. You can either ping all the panelists or all panelists and attendees, and I think a lot of you are making your introductions just to the 4 of us. So if you want to redo them and make sure that you're sending them to attendees as well, that's how everybody can see them. So a big question that we saw a lot in people RSVPing to this event is stuff around remote work and organizing during this time that we are remote. And Steph, I know that the Glitch, you guys have been working remotely so much from the beginning, and like changing your avatars on Slack and whatnot was a really big part of the movement you guys built. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so our company is half in the New York City office and then half just around the world. So everything we did had to be entirely online. We would have weekly meetings over just like Google Hangouts. We were working also kind of asynchronously just in Google Docs, and like using the commenting flow just to kind of have back and forth so it could accommodate time zones and people's schedules. When it came to actually going public, though, we were trying to figure out how to show support, because it seems like most companies do like wristbands or badges like this, but just the distribution of that would have been like almost impossible to send out to like 30 people at 30 different addresses. And then also it would just be so small in a video call. So we made an app to just read out your image. And it was just really remarkable to be in like the general channel in Slack and just slowly watch as like one by one, they all turned red. It was actually kind of funny because people were getting kind of annoyed because they're like, oh, now I have to like read names. I can't just like ping people based on, what their image is, because they all look the same. So it was just, yeah, so cool to see everyone read it out. After we were voluntarily recognized, we made an adapted version where it's just a little red stripe, but it's still like your face in there just to show solidarity after the process.
Do you guys have any other tips about having these organizing conversations remotely, or how the landscape looks different now, just with the fact that we're all talking through screens and there's not casual office conversation?
Yeah, well, we didn't actually, we do have a segment of our workforce which is remote. And initially, some of our strategies around that was to make sure that we also we had remote voices in the room, so we would know like the difficulties and that went into remote work. But similar to the reading out of the Slack emojis, Slack avatars, we had a when we went internally public, we had like a handshake emoji that we added to everyone who was in solidarity added to their names, and it was equally very interesting. But I'm really interested in how like this will affect organizing. I'm not sure if it would be more difficult or just having to be a little bit more creative, but I know at least from like a FaceTime perspective, it may, obviously you can't have the FaceTime with each other, but one of the hardest parts was to like find time to sneak away that didn't like impede on people's outside of work time. And I feel like maybe now it may be a little easier to do that because you can kind of like just side chat a little bit rather than having to like walk out of the office on a break. So.
What about digital security, especially because we are in the tech industry? I know a lot of people have questions about that, especially like, for example, Ben, you're organizing within like a Google office. You might not want to be using Google Groups or like Google Forms to get people's information. How did you guys confront digital security concerns?
Yeah, we stayed off of Google stuff for sure. I mean, Signal, that's a Pittsburgh product, so we use that a lot. I don't know. I mean, there's ways around it. But certainly it was Google. So it's everywhere. It's hard to avoid. So that was something that posed a little bit of a challenge. Getting people's numbers if they're willing to give them, and I still think there's no like substitute for the face-to-face conversations. So having as many of those in person was good.
Yeah, we have a whole working group called our Mechanisms Working Group, which is completely devoted to the digital security of the information that we have. Obviously, the collective bargaining committee has access to information that others do not, just information about our unit's salaries and compensation, et cetera. And that is very, very tightly kept under lock and key for only those few individuals who have access to it. And there's a pretty tight onboarding, offboarding procedure that we did and did in the past when we were organizing at first, and also post like full unit procedures just to make sure that everyone feels safe in the space. But also has access to all of the information that they actually need to make informed decisions.
All right, so switching gears a little bit, can you guys share more of the details of the actual nuts and bolts of the process to form a union?
I can start. So it took about 1.5 years from start to finish. There was I wasn't here at the very beginning, full disclosure, but at the very beginning of with Kickstarter United, there was some agitation within the workforce. So people were ready to start, they were talking already. It was informal conversations, but after the idea had been tossed around a lot, they started to discreetly gather internally and start to talk to other folks, the people that they trusted, discreetly, and then it started to move the snowball into a series of one-on-one conversations until there was a core group that felt comfortable to start actively interviewing unions to partner with for this decision. We landed with OPEIU, but I know that there were several other unions that were contacted and that we reached out to. Once we felt comfortable that we had enough internal support, we went internally public, which came with its own set of externally public consequences, because obviously we work in tech and this is a tech union, and going internally public, things leak. So we also had to kind of, manage the external communications alongside internal communications, as well as doing any damage control that happened as a result of that, which was kind of a painful process and a learning process as well. Like I said, I mean, I had never organized anything before, and most of my colleagues were not professional organizers. So we leaned a lot on our reps at OPEIU to give us information. And there were a couple of colleagues who were actually very active organizers in other groups. We organized for a full year, trying to have these one-on-one conversations, getting to a point where we felt comfortable, and requested voluntary recognition around, and were denied that by our leadership, which we then campaigned with our creative communities attached to Kickstarter for that recognition. And then we were formally denied again. So that is when we decided, based on our card collect, because every union member signs a card at this point. That's something that I left off because, wow, it feels like it's been an age, and it actually has not. But where you're asking people to pledge their support to the union by asking for their signature and their personal information, essentially. And by giving us this, they're saying that we trust each other now. Like, let's start to build this together, kind of. I guess, yeah. And then so we called for a vote at the end of December. I believe December 31st, we did it on New Year's Eve. And then voted in January. I was the observer. It was pretty wild to watch, like, all of your colleagues vote for this really important thing. And then we won our vote count in February. Our vote count happened in February because we have remote workers, so they were given absentee ballots, and those take 3 weeks to be collected. Yeah, it was, and in between all of that, there was a whole lot of work going on with communications working groups, with logistics. We were hosting picnics, and once we went internally public, we had a little bit more freedom to openly talk about it because we were a little bit more protected legally. So we would be speaking to a lot of folks in between. There was instances where organizers were laid off at Kickstarter, which was a whole other thing that we were having to deal with, both emotionally, internally, as well as externally. There was a lot of communication happening around that. So it felt like a roller coaster. There were some days where you'd get a couple signatures and you'd be really excited because a couple signatures is a big percentage of your unit. And then there are other days where there'd be bad press and you'd feel really bad about things. So yeah, it was a wild ride. Happy to answer follow-ups because I'm kind of rambled there.
So I'm actually going to start, now that it's almost 7:30, I'm going to move on to submitted questions. We have about 20 questions from people in the audience. How has your experience with company-specific unionization influenced your opinion on sector-wide unionization? And if so, how?
I don't know too much about sector-wide unionization, so I don't know that I have an opinion because I'm just not familiar.
I think sector-wide unionization would be fantastic, but I don't, I don't know how close we are to that.
Yeah, I kind of fall in the middle. I don't feel like I have enough information to form a full opinion, but also I do realize everyone should have a union, so that's kind of
Yeah. Next question. How can I beat apathy, specifically in a tech workplace? I work at a big tech company. How does the size of my employer shape my conversations with my coworkers?
This question gets me a little emotional because I think that this was like the hardest thing to deal with in organizing, was realizing when folks just didn't really care. And I think in any organizing or any movement, I think it's really, you know, and I understand that everyone has their own like lives and they have their own things going on in life. But I think that this in particular is, I think, continuing to, like I said before, continuing to ask questions and listen. Everyone is going to have something that they care about. I don't think that anyone is fully apathetic about everything, especially when you spend 8 hours of your day at a workplace. There's going to be something that you truly care. And I think framing, especially like from Kickstarter's perspective, we had a pretty good deal. Like we liked where we worked. That was one of the reasons why we wanted to unionize it, to keep what we had. And I think framing it in that perspective was really helpful for those folks who were a little bit more apathetic or on the fence, for sure.
I think I was really lucky. Our company is about 50 people and our bargaining block ended up being about roughly 32. And a lot of the like glitch ethos is being like a good tech company, like how tech should be. And our leadership is really, really vocal about like, you can lead a tech company in an ethical way. So I think that kind of like primed the conversation with everyone in our group, because everyone like applied to work here because we believed in this philosophy. So unionization is like part of that, about having a good tech workforce. So it made it easier to get everyone on board. I mean, that said, a lot of people also were like, yeah, I'll sign whatever. But then we had like the small committee doing a lot of the work, which is fine too. But it was, yeah, it was good to have a group that was already ready to say yes.
Okay. Next question. I'd love to hear panelists reflect on how COVID-19 shifts the landscape for organizing cross-class solidarity in tech, or perhaps it changes nothing. That would also be interesting.
I don't think it changes nothing. I think one example of it in our case, where it was a lot of the structure of our layoffs recently was around voluntary and involuntary, because we knew we had to hit a head count number, essentially. That is what they told us. And so there were folks within the unit who felt more comfortable taking a layoff than others. And that was really what we were trying to kind of dig into. Something else that we bargained for specifically was extended healthcare for those of our colleagues who made under the median salary. I think that the empathy that was shown in the support from this across the bargaining unit was just really inspiring and beautiful, and really proved that we were coming at this from like, we were trying to protect each other regardless of like who had like, whether it was fair or, you know, I think it was more like we want to make sure that everyone is set up in a good way going into this particularly.
All right, another question. I am interested in organizing my workplace, but I don't know where to begin, especially now that we're working from home. What's step one?
I think step one is just forming spaces where you can have conversations about what you want to improve in your workplace or what's wrong with it. All of our organizing kind of started on Signal, where it was like, it started before I started at Glitch, but there was a Signal chat just for people who were non-managers. And it was usually really quiet, but then sometimes things would boil up. And from there, our organizing just came out of the people who wanted to take all of that energy and turn it into action. Like we just spun off our own little chat from there, where we could still like hear the concerns, but then actually try to turn it into organizing. So I don't know, creating Signal channels, talking to your coworkers, just sending them a text and seeing how they're doing and how they're coping, I think is a good first step.
Yeah, I found like one other person that I trusted and talked to them, and then reached out to someone like a mutual friend who worked at USW, and that was pretty much it. You know, just get a couple people and then, you know, research labor unions and pick the one that you think makes the most sense. That would be my advice.
Cool. Next question. I'm a data science educator trying to figure out how to get more of the students I teach to be organizers/organizable. How can educators discuss these subjects with their students?
I think this is a really hard one. I just think as like participants in American culture, we are kind of like going against like 40 years of anti-union sentiment. So I don't know, I think just like talking really positively about the benefits of unions and just laying that groundwork early would be really, really beneficial. Yeah, I don't know how y'all feel about that.
+1.
Yeah, I'm a humanities person. So I had a lot of great history teachers, which certainly informed, you know, my like labor ethos or whatever. So yeah, I mean, you get to make the syllabus, so put some good books on it, I guess.
Actually, it's funny. My brother is a history teacher in Anchorage, Alaska, and he's actually often checks in with me asking, because he's been keeping his students up to date with what was happening with my with Kickstarter United's union drive. And towards the end of it, they were so enthralled with like how it was playing out, because there were articles that they could read, they could follow it in the press, that they started asking like for him to ask me for like personal updates, which so there is an appetite there, which is really exciting to see that there's movement happening. People are seeing this in a more positive light. So.
All right, here's a question that I think will probably be for Ben. Can contractors at big tech companies form bargaining units with full-time employees and contractors from other staffing firms, or do they all have to organize separately?
I think it depends. I'm not a labor law expert, so I don't want to like say the wrong thing. I know that because we all had the same employer, and we're all technically full-time employees of HCL, that we were able to, you know, form our own bargaining unit. I don't know. I don't know what you would do if you were a temp, because you have different boss, right? So it's, I think it's tricky. But I mean, you could have like some kind of like amalgamated local, I think, if you wanted to, if there was like 50% of each, you know, if you had the numbers. I'm sorry for the kind of non-answer there, but yeah, I'm not 100% sure.
So the two other co-organizers on this panel, Grace and Wes, work for major unions, and I think we're going to send a follow-up email to folks registered on this, kind of with Tech Unionizing 101, just with some more of the nuts and bolts, because it seems like a lot of the questions we're getting submitted here are a little bit more about the legal processes and real nitty-gritty about unionizing. So just wanted to let everyone know. We'll send that as a follow-up. Okay, what kind of things are you hoping to bargain for outside of the basic wages and healthcare?
We really wanted to be able to work from home. And so I guess we got that. I don't know. We mostly just want money, to be honest, money and time off.
We wanted formal harassment practices, also some sort of input into company strategy and product decisions was a big one for us as well. A lot of the fire that was lit under the initial organizers was around decision making at the company. So I think that's a huge piece, and I think something that really has not yet traditionally been bargained for as union. So we're excited to kind of dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, as a really small startup, some things we're really passionate about is trying to get an HR hire in. We currently don't have an HR department, and I know that's often the case at smaller companies, but we're excited about fighting for that, as well as putting in place a more transparent process around like roles, performance leveling, so that everyone knows how they can have career growth in the company and stay at the company for a long time, as opposed to having to move on to the next one because there's no next step for them to pursue.
I just wanted to address the conversation going on in the chat for people who are watching on Facebook or checking out the recording after. There is a lot of back and forth about what construes a bargaining unit, and it looks like in a lot of companies, in a lot of situations, a separate employer means a separate union vote. But it looks like in New York, there have been instances of contractors and full-timers as a single bargaining unit. So I think we're going to send out like a more detailed legalese response to this in our follow-up email. So thank you everybody who's chiming in there with all of your knowledge.
Can I also chime in, because we are actually, since we were not voluntarily recognized, we had to follow very strict NLRB rules around what our bargaining unit could consist of. Kickstarter specifically has a pretty substantial middle management org piece, and they were not allowed. We attempted to get them included in our earlier iterations of our bargaining unit, and they were not allowed to be included since we were not able to be voluntarily recognized. Another piece of that.
Yeah, we had the same thing happen. It was really frustrating too, because it shifted the goalposts like right when we were about to file cards. The lawyer at USW was like, how are there like 20 lead analysts? Like, what does this even mean? Are these all managers? There's only 100 people in 100 employees. How are there like 30 managers? So we counted, our numbers included them, but then they ended up not being able to vote. So that was a lot of fun.
I would say that in every single organizing committee meeting, we probably had like a solid 10 minutes trying to figure out who was or was not a supervisor, because I think a lot of the labor law rules aren't written with like office jobs in mind. So like project managers, product managers, things like that. It's like, okay, well, they don't hire, they don't fire, they don't actually directly supervise people, but they like manage the flow of work. So that counts as a supervising role. But just trying to like go role by role and decide what counts as a supervisor was very, very difficult.
I'm curious, Steph, did you actually count product and project managers in your unit, or no?
No, we didn't, no.
Interesting.
As well as editorial managers. Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right. How does decision-making process, how does that work in your union in the context of democracy?
We use, there's a couple of different ways depending on what we're deciding. Obviously, if we're voting on eradicating a contract or electing a committee, there will be different mechanisms. We use this mechanism OPA vote. When we voted to eradicate the severance agreement, it was a 50+1 vote. However, in the large majority of our cases, we'll use a system called Fist of 5, where because we're not a huge unit, this has worked in the past pretty well, where someone will make a proposal, and if of doing something, and then we'll take like the people who are present in the room, or if it's a decision that would affect more people, we may even put it to Slack, the union Slack, and we'll vote by using fist of 5, with a 5 being a clear support, a 3 being pretty neutral, not a blocking vote, and then 2s and 1s being more like, I have questions about this. So, yeah.
We're very new, so our only moment for a really democratic process so far was organizing our bargaining committee and who that would be. So we started with having everyone nominate who they would like to represent them, and then went to each of those individuals and asked whether or not they were interested in assuming that role. And then from there, we did a ranked choice ballot of the people who accepted their nomination.
Yeah, we did the same thing. We also used OPEIU for our bargaining committee election, and we got everybody's, we did ranked choice voting for that. And then we had a survey for what the most important items to bargain over would be. And we sent that out to the entire bargaining unit and got everybody's input on that. And now we are trying to negotiate for all those things. It takes a long time. It's a democracy, and it's like everything takes like a million messages and emails now, but it's better than the alternative. Everybody definitely for sure has a say. It's good.
Okay. Yeah, very different track with this question. Do you think it's possible for folks on immigrant visas to contribute meaningfully to unions, given that they may be potentially at greater risk?
One of the members of our collective bargaining committee is a visa holder. So yes, absolutely. I think it's important, actually, because you represent a subsect of the unit that are at risk and have different needs that other unit members may not actually understand. So it's important for them to be involved, for sure.
This might be also a more legal question, so we might be able to answer it in our follow-up email, but I'm not sure if there are specific, because there are protections for when you're organizing in your workplace against retaliation, and I'd be curious to know if visa protections are included in that. So I will just make a note to follow up with that. Okay. A lot of your campaigns have been very public online. Is there anything that you want to set the record straight about, or anything you'd change about the way your efforts were perceived by the general public?
When we went public, people were really, really supportive online. It was wonderful to just see so many like congratulatory tweets, and it was really nice. I did see a lot though that was like, I can't believe Glitch had to unionize. And I think I want to set straight that unionizing isn't some like last resort because things are terrible. Unionizing takes like a ton of work. If you're putting in that work, you care deeply about the company and you want to stay in that job and you want to make it good. It's not just like, it was horrible. And I just want to like set that straight as well, that it's something that's proactive and you want to have a voice in your workplace, and it's not necessarily bad. It's like you're just trying to improve things.
I feel like it's almost better for me to keep my mouth shut in this situation.
All right. All of you have people in your workplace who are not part of your proposed bargaining unit. How did you handle interactions with those folks? Were they an impediment? Were they an asset?
I stayed away from everyone in management, and I still kind of do. I think that's best for me personally. It depends on the person, right? It's like, and it's not, again, it's not a personal that management has to try to bust your union. That's like their job, and so I just stay away, and that's the best thing that I can do.
Yeah, I think it was really nerve-wracking because management doesn't have any protections. They aren't part of it. So I definitely didn't say anything to anyone. I didn't want to, because personally, I felt like I was putting their job at risk because they didn't have protections, and that didn't really seem fair. I know it is really hard though, because we are close to a lot of our managers. They're our friends, and kind of having to keep the secret for months was really hard on a lot of people in our bargaining unit, just to like have this thing that they can't tell their best friend, but it's occupying a lot of their time.
Like I said, we originally were trying to organize with some middle management. So it was pretty well known because they were kind of organizing, but we did try and keep that's separate so that they would organize each other versus like organizing like people that they supervised, to make sure that it wasn't like it couldn't be seen as coercive. So.
We got a follow up to this question. So as clarification, not just the management, but I mean people outside of your bounds of your job role. For example, the people who clean the office, or in the case of Ben, the full-time Googlers.
The full-time Googlers were predominantly super supportive and incredibly helpful, both in their workplace displays of support for us and their public support for us. And I've made some really some close friends who are full-time employees who I never would have probably talked to if it weren't for this. So and the staff is great too in our building. Yeah, I mean, I certainly just stay away from management, other than polite work interactions.
All right, so a couple of questions for Steph. Was it easy for Glitch to achieve voluntary recognition? And what were the key drivers of that success? And how did executives, and in particular Anil Dash, respond to the Glitch union?
So we had really amazing support when we delivered our letter to Anil. We went in with 70% of our cards signed after like a day and a half, I think. He was very positive. He is a union member in the past. He's been part of it. He has like actively tweeted that there should be more unions in tech. He was very, very supportive of us all the way through. It did take about a week before we got voluntary recognition. It was just kind of back and forth between the CWA just to make sure everything was squared away. But I think it was pretty painless. It was, just the waiting's always hard, right? But he was very, very supportive. He said he was proud of us and acknowledged the work we had done. So.
Okay. Someone says, I'm looking for a new software engineering job with a view to being strategic and organizing at work. Does anyone have any suggestions of where I should be looking?
Everywhere.
Pittsburgh.
Oh man, I almost want to share a meme that someone made recently because of these Kickstarter layoffs. It's the dandelion meme, where like there's one person holding a dandelion and that's Kickstarter leadership blowing on the dandelion, and then the dandelion is Kickstarter United, and then the rest of the tech industry, because they're laying off 45% of our bargaining unit. So literally go anywhere and start talking to your coworkers.
Yeah, I would follow up and basically agree with that. If you're interested in talking about unionizing and organizing at work, I feel like the tech industry is just ripe for that to be happening, and people moving around and having that conversation in more places is just better for all of us. What are some examples of direct actions and how were they received?
I talked about ours earlier when we all wore black to get sent home. It was received well. It was effective. And it was, yeah, we we got out of the office, so it was good.
I'm going to talk about one that wasn't received super well because I think it's important that we learn from our mistakes. So when we presented our request for voluntary recognition, we got a lot of people involved in this action. So I think there must have been maybe 40 people, about a few less than that had actually, or a few more than that had actually signed the voluntary recognition piece. We knew that we had the cards to support a majority as well. And we had printed it out and we were going to make a big thing of going and presenting it to members of senior leadership. In doing this, we were also capturing it on camera. And this is in the middle of an open space, forum. Like we're an open plan office. So there were people who were not involved in the action who were caught on camera. And that, while we did not share any of those photos, just the anxiety of being caught in the background of a photo during a piece of like this type of action was triggering for a lot of our colleagues. And it was something that we actually had to do a lot of damage control. And in the future, now knowing hindsight is 2020, knowing this, we would have probably done this in a different way. Whether not actually recording it or done it in a little bit more of a respectful way for our colleagues who were not involved in the action itself. So.
Follow up to that, here's a question for you, Toy. How has Kickstarter messaged their anti-union views alongside their main mission? Isn't Kickstarter a company meant for public benefit?
You guys are just going straight for the jugular. I think Ben said it before. It doesn't matter. Like Kickstarter's leadership, any leadership for the most part of a company that is like has a board of directors and has ties to like Union Square Ventures is going to be anti-union. So it's not surprising that Kickstarter leadership was sending what could be construed as union busting messaging right alongside their mission of bringing creative work to life. So that's, yeah.
What are some common arguments you've all heard from management against unionizing? What should we keep an ear out for, and how can we thwart these bad arguments?
There was a really awesome piece of literature on this that was created by my former colleague, Clarissa Redwine, who was fired for her union activity. It is called, I believe it's called the Solidarity Onboarding. Ooh, somebody correct me in the chat if I'm not giving this service, but it literally lists pretty much all of the different types of things that you'll hear from management that are kind of spun tactics to confuse colleagues of what actually unionizing is, or being a part of a union is, and what that means for your workplace.
Okay, yeah.
I'll try and find it and post it in the chat.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think that'd be great to be able to share out to people.
I think when I heard that, I also believe was in the Kickstarter letter too, is that like, how will we secure VC? And that's something I think that is really held over tech companies' heads, is like, how are we going to get our next round of funding? And from everything I've heard, that doesn't really factor into anything. And any VC that's willing to withhold money because they don't want workers to have rights is kind of exploitative. So like maybe you should steer clear of them. But I think that's something people hold over your head to kind of like threaten you. It's like a union will prevent us from getting funding.
We got a lot of like third party language in every mention of the union. Is like it was this big like nebulous entity that was going to come in and take over. And then it's the contradictory, well, you might not get anything, and they're going to bankrupt us because we'll have to pay all this money to you now. So I don't know. I mean, there's some resources out there too. There's like a Union Busters playbook, I think it's called, too, online, that just has like down the line, like everything that these like people tell you. It's pretty accurate.
Something else you can be aware of are the firms that your company is hiring as they get wind of union activity. Kickstarter in particular hired 2 firms, one which was like a media firm to help them weather this media storm that they were going to be dealing with that dealt predominantly with union busting or union activity. The other was legal firms that are tied to union busting in the past.
And that's something you can also lean on your union rep to look into as well. As we were going through the process, we told CWA some of the different vendors that Glitch works with to kind of check to make sure that none of them were involved in union busting activities. And
we got the guy that was in American Factory. This consultant came in and like gave us all these captive audience meetings and these like long presentations. So if you get to that point, just challenge them because they can't do anything and they're cowards. And, you know, it's, that really helped us a lot, is because we just didn't take anything that the consultants were telling us as fact, because it's all like sketchy anyway. Taking like the one like worst case scenario of like the Teamsters in the mid 50s and having that be like, you know, what happens every day in all unions. So yeah, definitely challenge the consultants if you have to talk to them.
All right, so I am going to wrap up at this point. We did get a few more questions in this, and so I'm going to read out what Grace put in the chat. For any questions that we didn't get answered, we're going to keep the forum open until 9 p.m. So just 1 more hour after this, and we're going to send answers to everybody in written form. We're going to send that as a follow-up for folks who registered for this. And we're also going to send the union resources and that Kickstarter guide, since those seem to be of interest to people. If anybody is looking for anything else, feel free to send it to that form, and we'll have that in a follow-up. And with that, I'm just going to say thank you guys so much for taking this time, and you were all really candid, and I think that was some great, like, tangible information for everybody here. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Bye.